Hello, I will do TeleFNCS service chaining demo, including setting up the chains as well as the devices within the chain. If you start from the top and looking at the typical deployment of different enterprises and with access to the internet via regional POPs and also hosted applications in the few data centers. And each of those contain separate service chains. There are service chains in the POP and service chains in the data center, which needs to be instantiated in different ways. And it's important to realize that, well, there are the chains, but the applications within the chain are composed out of best-of-breed L4 to L7 functions from various vendors with various configuration APIs involved in order to set up the end-to-end chain. So there are two sides here. One thing is to set up the L4 to L7 services accordingly in each individual service chain instance, meaning configuring the firewall, configuring the DPI for this specific service instance, and also configuring the traffic steering, routing or OpenFlow to set up the actual chain. These are two different things. And if you look at the complete problem, and maybe sometimes in the market we focus too much on the chaining itself and forget about the configuration of the devices in the chain. Setting up the traffic steering, or the forwarding graph as NFV calls it, is relatively easy compared to configuring the L4 to L7 devices within the chain, and both needs to be set up for a total solution. And of course this scales, and so if we look at the complete solution here, we have TeleFNCS on the top in order to manage the chain as a total, which includes the forwarding and the configuration within the chain. And NCS is capable of doing the whole thing and can interface to, say, a self-service portal or an order management system to set up the complete chain. So on the top here, you might request the NCS to provision, say, a secure VPN service, so the VPN itself and including the security functions in the chain. To create one and or modify results in massive reconfigurations throughout the distributed service chains in the data centers, in the POPs. And so this is a problem at scale when you come to real networks. How does this work from an NCS perspective? Well, from the top, the self-service portal requests NCS to set up the chain or a flow. That's the chain and the configuration of the devices in the chain. So the NCS then dynamically configures the forwarding rules for that particular flow and also sets up the configuration of the devices within the flow. So from a northbound perspective, the complete configuration is set up. Remember the two things here. How does NCS do that? Well, in the top, we have a service manager where you describe the end-to-end services in service models, and that's the true end-to-end service, the graph, as well as the configurations of the functions within the chain. Then southbound, we have a built-in OpenFlow controller called Tailflow, which has formal flowlet models. So the flowlet models specify the application running on top of OpenFlow. In this case, it's a service chaining flowlet model. And also we have the device models for the various vendors that live within the chain. And in this simplified demonstration, we will be running a shaper and a firewall as devices functions in the chain. So simplifying things a bit, we keep everything together as a service chain service model, which is decomposed southbound into the service chaining flowlet model, flowlets being the TeleFNCS abstraction of OpenFlow applications, and then device models that represents the REST calls, the CLIs, whatever is available on the device, which is abstracted to our device models. And we do all of these as one model, as one transaction. Okay, so let's now set up a service chain. So I have NCS running with the Tailflow controller for speaking OpenFlow southbound to open vSwitches here, and I have native applications for doing firewalling and shaping. So we can start by creating the chain service, and in this simplified case, I will access a web server where there are videos, and I can introduce the firewalls and shapers in between there. So let's just call it web server. And we're coming in that network. We have VLAN, and we have the destination network, and we have the ingress and egress ports. So that's the basic endpoints of the chain. And let's drag and drop the devices within the chain. So we can put a firewall here. Let's block port 80. We can drop a shaper. Let's give it very low speed here. And before committing this, let's look at what we've done here. So we're stitching the devices together over OpenFlow. So we have the OpenFlow here, we have the ingress and egress ports, and then the ports, firewall, and the shaper. So that's the configuration of the actual chain. But remember, in order for the chain to be complete, we also need to configure the firewall and the shaper. And that's what NCS does as one transaction. And we can dry run to see what happens here. So on the firewall, we create a filter for port 80. On the shaper, we set up a limit, but also notify here that we also talk to the built-in tailflow, the OpenFlow controller, in order to configure the complete chain. So we can commit that. So the chain is set up. We are blocking port 80 and we have a very low speed. So let's say that we want to access something on that web server. I have a previous cache here with speed test function, so I just want to reload that, but of course I blocked port 80, so I don't get to that one. So creating configuration is sometimes easy, although we have a complexity here of the chain itself and the applications within the chain as well. What's very important and what that tailf NCS can do is to modify services on the fly. So we can modify within the chain, block port 777 instead. So I'm modifying the chain, and let's see what we will do here. We will of course modify the port and the chain, so we can save it. So now port 80 is not blocked, and so again I'm repeating what I'm saying here is that this was the modification of a service chain that is up and running of the devices within the chain. So let's see if this time we can reach the speed test. So yes, of course, since I opened the port 80, and we can look at the speed test. And so we still have the shaper in the chain with a fairly low speed here. So when the speed test starts, we see not that impressive bandwidth. And we can also see here on the packet counts, when I do the download, that the chain sort of blocks on the web server side, so not very high speed. Let's fix that. Let's reconfigure the shaper within the chain. So again, configuring a device within the chain. Do the change. And we can do the speed test. Reload that. And we can see much better speed here. And we can also see so what we're doing here is checking the stats. So of course the built-in OpenFlow module can do the configuration of OpenFlow changes, but also check the counters. And here we see the packets counts, and now there's no difference between in and out. So this was modifying the chain. Okay, thank you.